Keanu Reeves takes down a billionaire to save a girl. Epic story of courage and justice. Welcome my YouTube channel Story Time. If you like this story, please don't forget like, subscribe and share. The evening sky had begun to darken as Keanu Reeves drove through the quiet streets of Los Angeles. He had just finished a long day of filming and was looking forward to a peaceful night at home. Despite his fame and fortune, he preferred solitude over the glamorous Hollywood lifestyle. For Keanu, happiness wasn't in the flashing cameras or red carpets, it was in the simple moments of life, away from the spotlight. As he stopped at a red light, his gaze wandered toward a small roadside cafe. It was nothing fancy, just an old brick building with flickering neon lights and a few scattered tables outside. Something about it caught his attention, or rather, someone. A young girl sat at one of the outdoor tables, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to keep warm. She wore a thin, faded hoodie, her jeans torn, not in a fashionable way, but in a way that suggested she had no other choice. Her dark blonde hair was messy, and her face carried the tiredness of someone who had seen too much hardship for her age. Keanu could tell she was hungry. Her eyes darted toward the plates of food being served to other customers, but she didn't ask for anything. She simply sat there, staring at her hands, lost in thought. The light turned green, but Keanu didn't move. The impatient honk from the car behind him snapped him out of his thoughts. Without hesitation, he pulled over to the side of the road and stepped out of his car. As he walked toward the cafe, he saw the girl glance at him for a moment before looking away. She had no idea who he was, just another stranger in the city. Keanu entered the cafe and approached the counter. The elderly man behind the register greeted him with a polite nod. "One coffee, please," Keanu said, sliding a $50 bill across the counter. "And whatever that girl outside wants. Just bring it to her, but don't tell her who paid for it." The old man's eyes flickered with recognition. "That's kind of you, Mr. Reeves." Keanu gave a small smile. "Just make sure she eats." Taking his coffee, he stepped back outside and took a seat at a table nearby. He watched as the waiter approached the girl, placing a plate of warm food and a glass of water in front of her. She looked up in surprise. I didn't order this." "It's on the house," the waiter said, smiling before walking away. For a moment, she hesitated, but hunger won the battle. She picked up the fork and took a small bite. Then another. Within minutes, she was eating as if she hadn't had a proper meal in days. Keanu watched in silence, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. He had spent millions on cars, houses, and charity, but somehow, this small act of kindness felt more meaningful. After finishing her meal, the girl leaned back with a deep sigh, staring at the sky as if she hadn't felt full in a long time. Keanu decided it was time to approach her. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked, motioning toward the empty seat across from her. The girl looked at him with cautious eyes. "It's a free country," she muttered. Keanu chuckled and sat down. Up close, he noticed the tired lines under her eyes, the slight tremble in her hands. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sophie," she replied, still not making direct eye contact. "Nice to meet you, Sophie." She finally looked at him then, her sharp blue eyes scanning his face. "You're not from around here, are you?" Keanu took a sip of his coffee. "Why do you say that?" "Because people around here don't just buy food for strangers," she said, her voice laced with suspicion. "Especially not for someone like me." Keanu shrugged. "Maybe I just like to help." Sophie let out a dry laugh. "Nobody helps for nothing." He could tell she had been through a lot, too much, perhaps. Her walls were high, built from years of disappointment and hardship. "Well," Keanu said, setting down his coffee, "if it makes you feel better, consider it a small kindness from one stranger to another." Sophie studied him for a long moment before sighing. "Look, I appreciate the food. Really. But I don't need charity." Keanu admired her pride, but he also saw the truth: she did need help. Then how about a conversation instead, he suggested. No charity, just two people talking. She hesitated but then gave a small nod. Fine. Keanu leaned back, resting his arms on the table. So, what's your story, Sophie? She exhaled slowly, as if debating whether to trust him. Then, she finally spoke. I used to live with my mom. She was all I had. But she got sick, real sick. Medical bills piled up, and before I knew it, we were drowning in debt. She passed away 6 months ago. Keanu's heart tightened. I'm sorry. Sophie gave a half shrug, as if trying to act indifferent. After she died, the landlord kicked me out. Couldn't pay rent. No money, no job, no family. Just me. Her voice was steady, but Keanu saw the pain in her eyes. He had lost people he loved too, his best friend, his girlfriend, his daughter. He knew that kind of grief, the kind that settled deep in your bones and never truly left. So, where are you staying now? He asked. She looked away. Here and there. Sometimes at a shelter, sometimes, she hesitated, then mumbled, wherever I can. Keanu didn't press further. Instead, he looked at her and asked, do you want to change that? Sophie frowned. What do you mean? I mean, Keanu said, do you want help getting back on your feet? A real job, a safe place to stay? Her eyes narrowed. Why would you do that? Keanu gave a small, knowing smile. Because I've been there. Sophie stared at him, searching for any sign of a lie. For the first time in a long time, she saw something in someone's eyes, genuine kindness. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change forever. Sophie's eyes flickered with uncertainty as she studied Keanu. She had met plenty of people who promised to help, social workers, strangers at shelters, even so-called friends who turned out to be anything but. Yet, there was something different about this man. He wasn't trying to lecture her, pity her, or make himself feel like a hero. His offer seemed genuine. Still, years of hardship had taught her one thing: trust was dangerous. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. You say you've been there, she said, her voice guarded. But no offense, you don't look like someone who's ever slept on the streets. Keanu gave a small smile, taking a slow sip of his coffee. Not the streets, no, he admitted. But I know what it's like to lose everything. Something in his voice made Sophie pause. There was no arrogance, no attempt to impress, just quiet honesty. You ever heard of River Phoenix? Keanu asked suddenly. Sophie frowned, trying to place the name. Wasn't he some actor? Keanu nodded. He was my best friend. We started out together, chasing dreams in Hollywood. He was talented, kind, but he got lost along the way. His gaze darkened, his fingers tightening slightly around his cup. Drugs took him. One night outside a club, he overdosed. I was supposed to be there, but I wasn't. If I had been, he trailed off, then shook his head. Anyway, after that, I learned that life can take people from you in the blink of an eye. Sophie stayed silent. She knew that feeling too well. Keanu exhaled and leaned forward. I don't tell you this to compare tragedies. I just want you to know, I get it. Losing someone, feeling like the world's turned its back on you. But you don't have to let it define you. Sophie looked away, biting her lip. Easy for you to say. Keanu chuckled. Not really. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $20 bill, placing it on the table. Here. No strings attached. Sophie frowned at the money. What's this for? Whatever you need, Keanu said. Dinner tomorrow. A bus ticket. A book. Doesn't matter. Just something for you. Sophie hesitated, then shook her head. I don't take handouts. Keanu smiled. Then think of it as a trade. You let me buy you dinner tonight, and I don't feel guilty about eating alone. Deal? Sophie rolled her eyes but, for the first time, a hint of a smile played on her lips. Fine. But only because I hate eating alone too. Keanu signaled the waiter and ordered another round of food. As they ate, Sophie slowly let her guard down, sharing bits and pieces of her story, how her mom had worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, how her father had walked out when she was little, and how she'd been struggling to find stable work ever since she got evicted. I had a job once, she admitted, pushing her empty plate aside. At a diner. But then David Brooks happened. Keanu tilted his head. Who's David Brooks? Sophie's expression hardened. A businessman. If you can even call him that. He owns a bunch of properties around here, including the building where my mom and I used to live. After she died, I couldn't pay rent. He let me stay for a while, said we could work something out. She clenched her fists. Turns out his idea of working something out wasn't exactly legal. Keanu's jaw tightened. He tried to take advantage of you. Sophie nodded stiffly. I refused, so he made sure I lost my job. Told the landlord of every cheap apartment I applied to not to rent to me. Now, whenever I think I'm finally getting on my feet, he shows up again, reminding me that I owe him. Keanu's grip on his cup tightened. He had met men like Brooks before, powerful, ruthless, the kind who thrived on making others feel powerless. But Sophie wasn't powerless. She just didn't know it yet. Where is he now? Keanu asked. Sophie shrugged. Probably running one of his shady deals. Or ruining someone else's life. Keanu thought for a moment. Do you still owe him money? Technically, no. But that doesn't matter to him. As long as I'm struggling, he gets to feel powerful. Keanu leaned forward. What if I told you I could help? Sophie narrowed her eyes. How? Keanu hesitated for a second. He had spent years staying out of trouble, avoiding drama, keeping his personal life as private as possible. But something about Sophie's story, about her fight, reminded him of the battles he had fought in his own life. And there was one thing Keanu Reeves never did, stand by and watch when someone needed help. I have connections, he said carefully. I know people who can get you a job. A real job. And a safe place to stay. Sophie looked at him suspiciously. And what do you get out of it? Keanu smiled. The satisfaction of proving that not everyone in this world is like David Brooks. For a long moment, Sophie said nothing. Then, finally, she exhaled. I don't know, man. I've heard stuff like this before. People promising to help, then disappearing when things get messy. Keanu's expression didn't change. I don't make promises I can't keep. Sophie studied him, trying to see if there was any hint of a lie. But all she found was sincerity. Okay, she said at last. I'll give it a shot. Keanu grinned. That's all I ask. As they finished their meal, neither of them noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Inside, a man watched them through tinted windows, his phone pressed to his ear. Yeah, it's her, the man muttered. But she's not alone. His eyes lingered on Keanu Reeves. I think we have a problem. Sophie felt lighter as she walked down the quiet sidewalk next to Keanu. It had been a long time since she'd spoken to anyone without the weight of survival pressing down on her. For once, she didn't feel like she was being judged or pitted, just understood. Where are we going? She asked, glancing at him. Keanu smiled. Somewhere safe. You need a place to stay, right? Sophie hesitated. I don't know, man. I don't want to be a burden. Keanu stopped and looked at her. You're not a burden, Sophie. Everyone needs a little help sometimes. I've needed it too. She held his gaze, trying to find any sign of dishonesty. But Keanu's eyes were steady, kind, completely unlike the men she was used to dealing with. Fine, she muttered. But if this is some fancy five-star hotel, I'm out. Keanu laughed. Nothing fancy. Just a small apartment I keep for when I need a break from the chaos. As they walked toward his car, neither of them noticed the black SUV creeping down the street behind them. Inside, a man in a dark suit kept his eyes on Sophie, speaking into his phone. She's with Keanu Reeves, he muttered. Yeah. That Keanu Reeves. There was a pause, then a response from the other end of the call. David Brooks isn't going to like this. 15 minutes later, Keanu pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a quiet apartment building. Sophie stepped out of the car, looking around cautiously. This place is nice, she admitted, taking in the clean brick walls and the warm glow of the hallway lights. It wasn't fancy, but it was 1,000 times better than the shelter she had stayed in last night. Keanu led her to an apartment on the 3rd floor. Inside, the space was simple and cozy, a small living room with a leather couch, a kitchen with neatly stacked dishes, and a bedroom with a neatly made bed. You can stay here as long as you need, Keanu said. There's food in the fridge, and the Wi-Fi password is on the counter. Sophie blinked at him. Are you serious? You're just giving me a place to stay. Keanu shrugged. I have more rooms than I need. And you deserve a safe place. Sophie walked further inside, running her fingers over the couch, almost as if she couldn't believe it was real. I don't get you, she murmured. Keanu raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? She turned to him. You're, like, this big movie star. You could be at some fancy party with a bunch of rich people, but instead, you're helping a homeless girl you just met. Why? Keanu sighed, leaning against the kitchen counter. Because I know what it's like to lose everything. And because, sometimes, all it takes is one person believing in you to change everything. Sophie swallowed hard. She wanted to believe him. More than anything, she wanted to believe that good people still existed. Before she could say anything, Keanu's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his easygoing expression darkening slightly. I need to take this, he said, stepping toward the balcony. Sophie sat down on the couch, listening as he answered the call. Emily, what's wrong? Emily. That was his assistant, Sophie remembered. I don't know how to say this, but, Emily's voice was urgent. Keanu, do you know who David Brooks is? Keanu stiffened. Yeah. Why? I just got a call from someone in law enforcement, Emily said. Brooks has been under investigation for months. Money laundering, blackmail, human trafficking. He's dangerous, Keanu. And apparently, he's looking for Sophie. Keanu's grip tightened on the phone. What do you mean, looking for her? Emily hesitated. A car was spotted outside the cafe while you were there. The license plate belongs to one of Brooks' men. Keanu's stomach twisted. He glanced back inside at Sophie, who was now absent-mindedly flipping through channels on the TV, completely unaware of the danger. She's not safe, Keanu, Emily continued. And now, neither are you. Keanu exhaled slowly. He had dealt with powerful people before, directors, producers, the Hollywood elite. But this was different. This wasn't a movie. This was real. I need you to find out everything you can about Brooks, Keanu said quietly. I don't care what it takes. Emily sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. Just, be careful, okay? Keanu hung up and took a deep breath. He had promised Sophie a fresh start, and he wasn't about to let some corrupt businessman take that away from her. But he knew one thing for sure, **** Brooks wasn't going to let Sophie go without a fight, ***. Later that night, Sophie lay awake in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling. She should have felt relieved. She had a warm bed, a safe place to sleep, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. But something didn't feel right. A strange feeling crept over her, like the eerie silence before a storm. She got up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened street below. And then she saw it. A black SUV parked across the road. Her stomach dropped. They had found her. Heart pounding, Sophie turned away from the window and rushed out of her room. Keanu was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked up as she entered. "Sophie. What's wrong?" She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, a loud crash shattered the silence. The front door had been kicked open. Sophie's blood ran cold. 3 men in dark suits stormed inside, their faces cold and expressionless. One of them pointed directly at Sophie. "Mr. Reeves," the tallest one said, his voice calm but threatening. "This doesn't concern you. Hand over the girl, and we'll be on our way." Keanu stood up slowly, his face unreadable. "I don't think so." The man smirked. "You really want to get involved in this? You don't know who you're messing with." Keanu took a step forward, his voice dangerously quiet. "No," he said. "You don't know who you're messing with." The men tensed. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, everything happened at once. The first man lunged. Keanu moved faster. 1 punch. 2. The man staggered back, clutching his nose as blood dripped onto the floor. The second man reached for a weapon. Keanu grabbed a nearby lamp and smashed it over his head. The third man hesitated, clearly realizing he had underestimated his opponent. Keanu glared at him. "Unless you want to end up like your friends, I suggest you leave." The man swallowed hard, then turned and ran. The other 2 scrambled after him, leaving as quickly as they had come. Sophie stood frozen, her breath shallow. Keanu turned to her, his eyes filled with determination. "Pack your things." Sophie blinked. What? "We're leaving," Keanu said firmly. "Now." Sophie didn't argue. Because for the first time in a long time, she knew, this fight wasn't over, Sophie's hands trembled as she stuffed a few borrowed clothes into a backpack. Her heart pounded so loudly it drowned out everything else. The reality of the situation had just crashed over her like a tidal wave. David Brooks wasn't just watching her. He had sent people to take her. Keanu was moving quickly, checking his phone and throwing on a black leather jacket. His usual calm demeanor was now edged with urgency. "We don't have much time," he said, glancing toward the broken door. "They'll be back, and next time, they won't just send 3 guys." Sophie swallowed hard. "Where are we going?" Keanu grabbed his car keys. "Somewhere safe. Trust me." She hesitated for only a second before nodding. What other choice did she have? They drove through the city in silence, the headlights cutting through the darkness. Every time Sophie saw a black SUV, her stomach twisted in fear. She kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting another attack. Keanu, on the other hand, was eerily composed. His grip on the steering wheel was firm but steady, his expression unreadable. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Sophie finally asked. Keanu sighed, his eyes locked on the road ahead. "Not exactly like this. But I've dealt with people who think power gives them the right to ruin lives." Sophie leaned back, exhaling shakily. "I never should have stayed in one place so long. I should have known Brooks wouldn't just forget about me." Keanu glanced at her. "None of this is your fault, Sophie. You shouldn't have to run just to be safe." She let out a bitter laugh. "That's easy for you to say. You don't have to worry about people like him." Keanu's jaw tightened. "You'd be surprised. Sophie frowned, but before she could ask what he meant, Keanu suddenly turned off the main road onto a smaller, winding street. The bright city lights faded into the background as they entered a more secluded area. "Where are we?" she asked. Keanu pulled up to a high steel gate. With a press of a button, it slowly opened, revealing a sleek, modern house tucked away behind a cluster of trees. It wasn't a mansion, but it was clear whoever lived here valued privacy. Keanu parked the car and turned to her. "This is a friend's place. He's out of town, and I told him we needed somewhere safe for a few days." Sophie stared at him. "You really have friends who just lend you houses?" Keanu smirked. "When you work in Hollywood long enough, you meet all kinds of people." He led her inside, locking the door behind them. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, but at least it felt secure. Sophie sat on the couch, still trying to process everything. "So what now? We just hide forever?" Keanu shook his head. "No. We take the fight to him." She blinked. "What?" Keanu leaned against the counter. "David Brooks is used to controlling people through fear. He thinks he can do whatever he wants without consequences. But I know people who can make his life a nightmare." Sophie's stomach churned. "Keanu, you don't understand. Brooks doesn't just ruin lives, he destroys them. He has people in law enforcement, politicians, judges. He always finds a way out." Keanu's expression darkened. "Then we find a way to trap him." Sophie rubbed her temples. "How do you even start with someone like him?" Keanu exhaled, his eyes sharp with determination. "We hit him where it hurts. His money, his reputation. If he has dirty secrets, we expose them." Sophie let out a humorless laugh. "Easier said than done." Keanu pulled out his phone. "That's why we need help." Within an hour, Keanu had gathered a small but powerful team, his assistant Emily, a lawyer named Marcus, and a journalist named Rachel. "I've been digging into Brooks for months," Rachel said over a video call. "He launders money through fake businesses and offshore accounts. But the problem is, he's careful. He covers his tracks." Marcus, the lawyer, nodded. "Legally, he's slippery. But if we can get evidence, something undeniable, we can take him down." Keanu turned to Sophie. "You used to work for him. Do you know anything?" She hesitated. "I never saw paperwork or anything. But I did hear him talk about some special accounts in the Caymans." Rachel's eyes lit up. "That's a start. If we can track those accounts, we might find proof of illegal activity." Keanu nodded. "Then we move fast. The longer we wait, the more dangerous this gets." Sophie exhaled, still struggling to believe this was happening. Just days ago, she had been alone, broke, and hopeless. Now, she was sitting in a hidden safe house with a Hollywood star, plotting to take down a corrupt billionaire. But deep down, she knew Keanu was right. If they didn't fight back, Brooks would never stop. Over the next few days, the team worked tirelessly. Rachel used her media connections to dig up information. Marcus reached out to contacts in law enforcement. Emily traced Brooks' offshore accounts. And Keanu? He prepared for the moment Brooks would strike back. One evening, Sophie found him in the backyard, practicing with a combat knife. The fluid precision of his movement sent a chill down her spine. She crossed her arms. "So, you really do know how to fight." Keanu chuckled, twirling the knife before sliding it back into its sheath. "Let's just say I've had some good teachers." Sophie hesitated. "Do you think this is actually going to work? Bringing him down?" Keanu met her gaze, his voice steady. "I don't just think it will. I know it will." Sophie let out a shaky breath. "You're crazy, you know that." Keanu grinned. "So I've been told." That night, as the team made their final preparations, Keanu's phone buzzed. It was a text. Unknown number ***, walk away, Reeves. Or you won't live to regret it, ***. Keanu stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. Then, without hesitation, he typed back. Keanu Reeves ***, come and try. He turned to Sophie. It's time. Sophie's heart pounded. Time for what? Keanu's eyes burned with determination. The air inside the safe house was thick with tension. Sophie sat at the kitchen counter, her hands gripping a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Across the room, Keanu was on a call with Rachel, the journalist, who had spent the past few days digging into David Brooks' criminal empire. We got it, Rachel's voice crackled through the speaker. Emily tracked Brooks' offshore accounts, and guess what? The money trail leads straight to human trafficking operations. Keanu's grip tightened on the phone. That's enough to bury him. Marcus, the lawyer, chimed in. We need to act fast. If Brooks gets wind that we have this, he'll start erasing everything. Sophie exhaled shakily. What do we do? Keanu looked at her, his gaze firm. We leak it to the right people, the press, law enforcement, even some of Brooks' enemies. Once it's out in the open, he won't be able to cover it up. Sophie's hands trembled. The thought of exposing Brooks thrilled and terrified her. If they succeeded, he would never be able to hurt anyone again, but if they failed. Keanu seemed to sense her fear. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We're not alone in this, Sophie. And we're not backing down. She took a deep breath and nodded. Let's do it. That night, Rachel sent the information to multiple news agencies. The moment the story hit the internet, it exploded. Billionaire David Brooks tied to criminal empire, evidence of money laundering and human trafficking uncovered. Social media went wild. News channels picked up the story. Even celebrities and activists started speaking out. But Sophie knew Brooks wouldn't go down without a fight. And she was right. An hour after the news broke, the power in the safe house cut out. Keanu was on his feet instantly. They're here. Sophie's pulse skyrocketed. What do we do? Keanu pulled a handgun from a drawer and handed her a small taser. Stay behind me. No matter what happens, don't let them take you. A shadow moved outside the window. Then, the front door burst open. 5 men in tactical gear stormed inside, guns raised. Give us the girl, Reeves, and we walk away, one of them growled. Keanu's stance was calm but deadly. Not gonna happen. Before they could react, Keanu moved. He disarmed the first man in a blur of motion, twisting his wrist until the gun clattered to the floor. He slammed an elbow into the second attacker's face, sending him crashing into the wall. The room erupted into chaos. Sophie ducked as gunfire rang out. Keanu moved like a ghost, using the dim light to his advantage. A swift kick sent another attacker sprawling. One man grabbed Sophie from behind. She jabbed the taser into his neck, and he collapsed, convulsing. Nice, Keanu said breathlessly, knocking out the last attacker. Sophie's chest heaved. Are we okay? Keanu's gaze darted to the fallen men. For now. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was Emily. Keanu, she said, her voice urgent. Brooks is gone. He disappeared an hour ago. His private jet took off, and no one knows where he is. Sophie felt her stomach drop. He's running. Keanu exhaled sharply. Not for long. The next day, news broke that David Brooks had been arrested. A private investigator working for Rachel had tracked Brooks to a remote airstrip. Before he could escape the country, FBI agents swooped in. Sophie watched the news in stunned silence. The once powerful billionaire was now in handcuffs, his empire crumbling around him. Keanu sat next to her, watching the screen. It's over. Sophie felt a lump rise in her throat. I never thought I'd see this day. He smiled softly. You made it happen. Tears welled in her eyes. For the first time in years, she was free. A week later, Keanu and Sophie sat at a small cafe, the same one where they had met, So, Keanu said, sipping his coffee. What's next for you? Sophie hesitated. I don't know. I've spent so long running, I never thought about what I actually want. Keanu smiled. Then maybe it's time to figure that out. She looked at him. And you? What happens when this is all over? Keanu chuckled. I go back to making movies. Sophie smirked. You ever think about doing action movies? I think you'd be pretty good at it. Keanu laughed. I'll consider it. A comfortable silence settled between them. Then Sophie said, You saved my life, Keanu. He shook his head. You saved yourself, Sophie. I just helped you get there. She exhaled, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. And for the first time in a long time. She wasn't afraid of the future. The battle isn't over yet. Keanu Reeves is about to face his toughest challenge. Stay tuned for the next part. If you want next part, please comment for next part. Thank you for watching my YouTube channel Storytime. Please don't forget like, subscribe and share.